I have dedicated a considerable amount of my life to teaching Italian. My name is Laura. The pattern, with its continual presence of chalk dust and the familiar ring of school bells, had become second nature by the time I was 42 years old. My life, though, took a subtle but unexpected turn. Like making eye contact in a busy room and sensing that something is going to change. I met Marco on a normal March afternoon when it was raining. Isabella, his daughter, was a private student of mine. She was very engaged and conscientious about her assignments. Upon Marco's arrival to my classroom to get her that day, she was occupied with doodling in her notebook. I apologize for interrupting you in this manner, he muttered, standing uncomfortably at the entrance in his soaking coat and wind-tousled hair. Absolutely not, I responded with a smile that was meant to reassure. We're almost done. Isabella has just finished a workout. As he watched us, Marco leaned against the doorframe and gave us a nod. He mentioned that she spoke highly of you. Says you make learning fun. With a chuckle, I put my books away. I do my best. Italian is a lovely language. It calls for some enthusiasm. Doesn't it? He crossed his arms and shrugged, a little smile creeping up his face. I'm Marco. By the way, I said, Laura, and reached out my hand in response, while chatting excitedly about the upcoming class. Isabella gathered her belongings. As he listened, Marco's eyes darted from her expressive face to mine. He was obviously a doting parent. Marco hesitated just before they left. Hey, there's a small community gathering with food and music this weekend if you're free. It's not too strenuous. Why don't you swing by and inject the celebration with a little of that fiery Italian spirit? The simplicity and unexpectedness of the invitation both caught me off guard. Well, I see no reason not to. That sounds like a lot of fun, I said. Well, it seems like it's more of a social gathering than a date. He amended himself after saying, I mean, it's not a date. Just a friendly outing. I chuckled and said, got it. So as to alleviate the uncomfortable situation. A friendly outing. While the community band played nostalgic songs and the kids ran around, Marco became more forthcoming over the shared meal at our first expedition. You know, I'm a widower, he continued, his voice slightly raspier and more subdued. Jack and Isabella are my children, and I've been raising them alone. A true firecracker. He's 12 years old. With compassion in my heart, I gave him a nod. Sounds like you've got your hands full. Yeah, it's been tough, but we manage, he responded, making a poke at his food. They are sweet children. They simplify things. As time went on, we delved further into each other's stories. We strolled through parks and gathered at cozy cafes. During these strolls, I crossed paths with Jack, a vivacious young man whose laughter and eyes resembled those of his father. He became friendly with me right away, showing me his drawings and inquiring about Italy. I was then introduced to Marco's mom by Marco. Her hefty figure belied her keen tongue and friendly grin. So you're the cute woman who's making my son happy again, she added, taking a non-derogatory look at me. Glad he's found someone who can put up with his cooking. Joining a new family wasn't exactly in my grand scheme of things. It took place as if predetermined, with no effort on anyone's part. Things became more serious after Marco and I had been dating for a while. I went from being his girlfriend to playing a major role in his and his children's lives before I even realized it. We made the decision for me to move in one Saturday morning. It was weird, but right. To put my life into boxes. I was aided by Marco and the kids to carry my possessions into their house, which would later become our home, with yet another hefty box bearing the name Books. Marco playfully said, "I hope you've got room for all these books. Better make room, or I'm building a library in the backyard," I said in response. As we paced the living room, attempting to arrange everything, I fired back a laughing fit. Both Jack and Isabella were really enthusiastic when they showed me around their rooms and gave me suggestions on where to put my belongings. "If you'd like, you can use my overflowing bookshelf, which is filled with model cars and vintage comic books, as a storage solution," Jack said. "Yours truly, Jack." While playing with his hair, I suggested that we swap out some books for space for his vehicles. Meeting Rosa, Marco's mother, in the midst of our new living situation was the true test. Her tone was friendly, but her eyes were watchful when she arrived that afternoon. As she watched me organize the kitchen, she commented, "So, you're setting up shop here now?" "Huh?" I replied. "Yeah, Rosa. Making it official. But I wasn't sure how much land I could legally claim." "Well, just keep in mind that Marco prefers his eggs over easy, not scrambled," she pointed out with impish glee. "I'll remember that," I said with a smile, enjoying her candor and directness. Sharing a home required a great deal of adaptation. Marco put in a lot of time in the office, so I ended up hanging out with Jack and Isabella more. Over time, I became more than simply. I became an integral part of their everyday lives, helping children with homework and preparing meals together. On some days I felt like I was treading on people's toes or crossing invisible boundaries. But for every uncomfortable moment, there were a dozen more moments of laughing and shared secrets. We were settling into a steady, leisurely groove. We each had our moments, and we learned about each other in ways that can only happen when you live in close quarters. "You know, you make this place better," Marco observed one night when we sat on the couch, fatigued from the day, speaking while putting my head on his shoulder. "I expressed my desire for you all to remember that this is still your home. It wasn't simple being a stepmom. There weren't any manuals or instructions. But that night I slept well, listening to the house's gentle hum. I knew this was where I belonged. It was disorderly and imperfect, but perfect in its own way. For that second, it was sufficient. Prior to Rose's stroke, my finest times with her were behind me. When she came over, we would spend hours cooking together, catching up on one another's lives, and exchanging recipes and stories. Back then, our home was always alive with the sound of laughing and the comforting scent of our favorite Italian meals. Unfortunately, things took a surprising turn when Rosa became paralyzed. As is often the case in life, a sea change occurred. I took it upon myself to look after her after Marco brought her into his home. Being fair to her was my first concern because she was a member of my family. But there was an eerie lack of assistance from Marco. As the days progressed into weeks, his estrangement grew increasingly apparent, leading me to believe he was simply overworked. Raising Rosa was an occupation in and of itself. I jumped in without hesitation, holding on to the comfort we had shared, because she needed help with everything. Our once light-hearted conversations became more substantive when she appeared to have become somewhat resolute due to her health. "Did you make the sauce with basil?" While I was in the kitchen, Rosa would watch me from her wheelchair and ask me harsh questions. I would reply, "Yes, exactly as you instructed me," in an effort to get her attention and perhaps elicit a grin. However, those were the days when smiles were scarce. Our communication deteriorated as time passed between Marco and me. After dark, I made an effort to close the distance. "Marco, our communication has dried up. Is everything all right?" His comments pierced the air after a brief period of silence. "Laura, I'm simply exhausted. It has been quite a challenge to manage everything." Despite the shivers, I nodded. He avoided looking me in the eye. We could feel the gulf closing in on us. I diverted my attention to Rosa and the children, ignoring those thoughts. Over the years, having Rosa around became the norm until her untimely demise. In spite of this, her death came as a shock, and the burial was a whirlwind of black gowns, solemn expressions, and hushed condolences. The subsequent argument, in which Marco's genuine emotions burst forth, was the ultimate shock. "Now you're merely occupying room. Laura, I put up with you mostly because of the value you added. And you. What good are you now?" His remarks stunned me like blows to the face. "Marco, how can you say that after all these years?" "You're absolutely right. Laura, all you cared about were the kids and my mom." With a wave of his hand, he waved me aside and turned away. The once naive children started behaving more like grown-ups as well. Once warm and welcoming, Isabella has grown distant and vicious. "Really? Laura, you don't have anyone. You're only here because we feel sorry for you," she would put it, her tone betraying her contempt. "Jack wasn't any nicer either. Why haven't you left yet?" Whenever we would pass each other in the corridor, he would sneer and say, "You're just taking up space." Every day, I felt the ache of their rejection and harsh remarks. Even though I had invested so much of myself into this house, I felt lonely there. My once loving and supportive family now views me as an annoyance and has turned against me. Marco arrived in one night with a look like a storm cloud, and I was laying the table for supper, hoping for a peaceful meal. "Laura, why do you insist on playing the happy families game? You know it's all a show," he said angrily, dropping his keys on the table. After a moment of hesitation, I delicately placed the last fork on the table, my hands quivering slightly. I started by saying, "I don't understand, Marco." But my tone betrayed my confusion. As he opened the fridge, his fury was evident as he answered, "You were part of this setup. Like furniture, useful for a time. And now just taking up space. His gaze searched for something more than just food. I felt the room engulf me when I stood there silently, attempting to process his angry remarks, with looks that mirrored their father's contempt. Isabella and Jack made their entrance. Jack reached into the fridge for a Coke, his expression betraying his mocking nature. It might be time for you to accept it, Laura. In his mocking tone, he compared you to an old couch that we ought to have discarded long ago. The room was cut to ribbons by Isabella's incisive laughter. Laura. Even you have to admit that it's true, she said. You're just the leftovers now. And her words sliced through my remaining defenses, as if to hide the tears that were on the verge of falling. I averted my gaze. I have loved and cared for every one of you. Why are you being so cruel to me? My voice quivered with emotion when I whispered, with a nonchalant shrug. Marco waved my sentiments aside. Is it love? His counter-reaction was as sharp as a slap in the face. He thought that was a harsh term for simply carrying out his duties, as their nasty remarks resounded in my mind. The rest of dinner was spent in nervous quiet. Excess food. Obsolete. Outdated furniture. I could tell that they thought I was just a transient aid worker who had overstayed her welcome. When you least anticipate it, life will throw you a curveball. I was about to believe things couldn't get worse when my health plummeted. My legs, which had previously supported me throughout my long days of teaching and housework, suddenly started hurting all the time. There was little comfort in the doctor's nebulous prognosis of persistent inflammation and potential degenerative disorders. All they said was, get used to it. I was floored by this abrupt shift. My beloved and highly successful career as a private school teacher came to an end. I had no choice but to resign, which meant giving up not only my salary but also a piece of who I am. When I was at home, I had to fight my way through every step and every task. Not only did I feel uncomfortable at home, but I also felt confined to my own body. The harsh reality hit me when I saw Marco's response to my worsening condition. After I had carefully washed the breakfast dishes one morning, rubbing my eyes with each motion, Marco walked into the kitchen. His expression was one of annoyance rather than care. What gives with this cleaning business? You're just creating chaos, he said with an angry tone in his voice. Marco. I'm attempting to lend a hand. My response came when I leaned against the counter for support, explaining that I couldn't just sit around. Help. To you. That's assistance. His answer was as sharp as a dagger to the heart. And you're more of a burden today than anything else. His retaliation was as sharp as the anguish in my legs. His comment sliced through the air and cut me to the core. Marco and the kids wasted no time showing off the expensive electronics and luxury clothing that they had purchased with the bequest. At the same time, I got nothing, which is not surprising given my current expectations. Their extravagant spending was a cruel reminder of my place in this family and a slap in the face. Plus, Marco and the kids were always making it clear that I was just visiting them out of sympathy. Remember, you're just one argument away from being out on the street. The words they spoke ensnared me in an imprisoning cycle of silent despair. On the other hand, I happened into a website that connected me with private language instructors online. As I considered returning to the teaching profession of Italian, my heart raced with the prospect of reuniting with a long-lost aspect of my identity. As I eagerly put down my credentials and work history, I dived headfirst into creating my profile. Experienced Italian teacher. Personalized and engaging lessons. I said. I didn't waste much time getting my first session scheduled. I felt a surge of warmth I hadn't felt in years as memories of the joy of teaching, of speaking Italian, of connecting with enthusiastic students, flooded back. After Marco and the kids departed from my room every day, I would turn a corner into a makeshift school. I only had a small group of students at first, but quickly news got around. I ended up teaching more and more when my schedule became full. By telling me, "You're really good at this, Laura." A student boosted my self-esteem during a video conversation. As word got out about me, I began to receive rave reviews and my fees skyrocketed. Likewise, my income did. I couldn't believe it. I was finally earning my own money, more money than Marco. To be exact, after what felt like an eternity. Although I refrained from disclosing this to anyone, someone would find a way to take it or make it so Marco and his kids can't help but spoil it for me if they knew. After a particularly fruitful session, I reclined and sighed with contentment one day. Marco, as usual, strolled in at that very moment. The Italian flags, notebooks, laptop, and other teaching aids that I had spread out were all scrutinized by him. His tone was one of suspicion as he inquired, "What's all this?" My voice remained steady and controlled when I responded, "I'm teaching." Even though my heart was racing. Teaching here. His bewilderment was plain to see. He was caught off guard by this. "Who would want to learn from you?" It was an honor for me to respond. "People from all over the world." Turns out I'm extremely popular, I couldn't disguise it. Marco scoffed, evidently unimpressed. "Make sure this doesn't interfere with your chores around the house," said the doctor. I reassured him. "It won't." Before returning to my research, even though he irritated me by being in my sanctuary, he quietly departed before I could stop him. I slept that night with a mischievous grin on my face. The bequest was theirs to spend as they liked on transient pleasures, Marco and his children included. In the meanwhile, I was constructing an enduring personal project. The online teaching I did wasn't merely a means to an end. It was my safety net and means of evasion. I had transformed from the oppressed stepmother into Laura, the in-demand Italian tutor, a lady with ambition and a bulging bank account. An atmosphere of palpable tension pervaded the dining room when the guests dined. I served the dinner and the children, including Marco, were unusually silent, avoiding looking at me. There was an underlying tension that I could sense building. But I was unprepared for the words that would sever our familial bonds. Marco broke the stillness first, his voice distant and unfeeling. He boldly declared, "I got a promotion at work," without directing his gaze towards anyone in particular. "I bought a new house too." I stopped, spoon suspended in midair, taken aback by the news. I mustered up the courage to say, "That's great. Congratulations." Even though a sickening sensation began to accumulate in my stomach. Marco said, "Yeah, well, don't get too excited," staring at me with an unexpected intensity. "You are not going with us. I'm ready for the kids and I to start over. So we're moving. Hearing him. The room whirled just a little. Isabella laughed. Knife-like. From across the table. In a brand new house. Who needs an elderly, limping maid? Laughing. Jack chipped in. You should count yourself fortunate that we are not throwing you out on the street tonight. Every single one of their faces betrayed an air of disdain and detachment as I scanned the room. I whispered. It's sold. As my heart hammered in my chest and I inquired about the house. Specifically this one. The new owners will be taking over in a month. Marco stated plainly. It might be too late to try to locate a shelter by then. A cacophony of screeching laughter resounded across the room. My hands quivered in my lap when I remained there. Taken aback. In return for all the years of tender loving care and selfless sacrifice. They received this as a token of their gratitude. When the giggling subsided, I could make out my own voice. Low and steady. Got it. Consequently, I suppose there is nothing else to be said. Isn't there? With a shrug. Marco returned his focus to his plate. Clearly uninterested. I guess not. I whispered. When I steadied myself on my wobbly legs. I turned to face each of them. There was no trace of shame or guilt on their features as they continued to eat. Gently said. Enjoy your dinner. Before slipping out of the room. I felt the full weight of the situation as I lay in my room. I thought they were going to just abandon me. Treat me like a piece of junk. And forget about me. But I felt a certain relief creep over me when I sat there. Their scorn. Their tyranny. And their brutality had no hold on me anymore. While it was liberation, it was not the kind I had hoped for or anticipated. On the day I departed from Marco and his children, I experienced an unusual blend of freedom and profound melancholy. I was followed by Marco's harsh words when I drew my final suitcase up to the door. He laughed cruelly. Hope you enjoy the Flophouses. Because that's all you can afford. And the sound reverberated through the deserted room. Even his children, Isabella and Jack, threw shade their way. Got out of here. Thankfully. You're no longer a nuisance as you stumble around the house. What was the use in responding? When confronted with their level of brutality, I had long ago realized that words had no power. With a slam of the door behind me, I marched out, ending a painful chapter in my life and entering my new apartment. The house I rented out in secret was like taking a deep breath for the first time in years. It was modest in appearance but fundamentally autonomous. Here, the peaceful atmosphere would be undisturbed by cutting remarks or the specter of disdain. Assembling my new home was a restorative experience. I placed my small desk next to the window and carefully arranged my book collection. This would be my center for my online Italian lessons. I savored the peace and quiet that followed the finalization of my divorce. We finally met while we were both stood across from Marco and his children in the courtroom. Their grins conveyed assurance and a lack of remorse. I was in no mood to settle for alimony. So I politely declined. I made it clear that I had grown to regard them as complete strangers. Students from all over the world flooded my schedule once word of my tutoring attempts spread. The money that came from it was plenty. And it was a success that I was completely responsible for. One evening as I sipped tea at my just-bought kitchen table, a long-lost buddy called with startling news. she asked, a little shakily. Have you heard about Marco? He's relocated into a lavish new home. But his careless spending is unrestricted. I agreed. Shook my head. And grinned cheekily. Not surprising at all. I said. His strength was never future planning. I was not surprised by the rumors about the lavish spending of Marco and his children. Instead, they were the catalyst that set things in motion. I secretly taped multiple instances of their angry outbursts and nasty insults throughout the stormy last months of our marriage, at first for my own record. The next obvious step was to send these files to Marco's employer in an anonymous manner. I was prepared for immediate consequences because I was aware of the company's strong policy against harassment. The consequences did indeed materialize shortly thereafter. My phone rang one night and Marco's number was on it. My curiosity got the better of me. And I answered even though I was hesitant at first. His voice was a mix of wrath and terror, betraying his desperate state. Laura. What have you done? He passionately demanded. I told them in a level-headed manner. Your employer was not pleased with the way you handled other people. And I could almost taste the vindication in my voice. You've deceived me. He yelled out. They reduced my pay and demoted me. At this point, how am I to continue making mortgage payments? The house could be lost. The accusatory tones of Isabella and Jack resonating in the background, blaming me in a similar manner, added a layer of panic to his comments. Laura. You are the one who is accountable. This will cost you. Jack said, his voice cutting through the phone line. After being silent for far too long. A real, belly-aching chuckle finally broke out of me. A flophouse could be your final destination now. How ironic. I said, my laugh betraying the sarcasm in my heart. Come on, Laura. Lend us a hand. Apologies. But none of that was intended. We'll do anything, Marco said, his voice quivering with concern. Marco. You are completely confused. Your apologies and me being your savior are not things you need. When you made me feel like an emotional punching bag or servant, I retaliated angrily. But we're family. He attempted a final time. We were family. I told him icy, but with a new sense of strength. Goodbye, Marco. Along with Isabella's and Jack's numbers. I blocked theirs when I concluded the call. For the first time, I felt relief. I had found the closure I had been seeking. A few weeks later, word got around among our mutual friends that Marco and his kids had really been kicked out of their house because they couldn't pay the mortgage. They had to drastically reduce staff, which meant the adult children had to get jobs to make ends meet. It made me grin to think about them fighting when I was thinking about buying a house of my own. Justice was at stake. Not merely vengeance. My goal was to demonstrate that I could no longer be bulldozed. I redirected my focus to my computer and saw that a student had sent me a message of gratitude for the motivational lessons I had taught them. My heart was comforted. Nobody could ever take it away from me now that I had discovered my niche and my calling. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Next, let's watch another similar story. I'm Kimberly, and this is my tale. Raised in a quaint town, I attended the local high school where fate introduced me to Jason. He stood tall. A captivating figure always at the heart of attention. We were merely adolescents. Yet it felt like an instant connection. Dating ensued swiftly. And soon we were inseparable. By the tender age of 20. We exchanged vows. Blinded by youthful exuberance. Looking back. Our naivety was palpable. Though in the moment. It seemed an idyllic fairy tale. Jason epitomized the carefree spirit. Brimming with grand aspirations and an even grander persona. I, on the other hand, embraced pragmatism. Focused on forging a stable path ahead. We complemented each other, or so I believed. Shortly after our nuptials, news of my pregnancy with Lily graced us. It was a delightful surprise. One that filled Jason with boundless joy. For a time, we basked in the euphoria of impending parenthood. Envisioning a future together. Yet, cracks began to surface with time. Jason's carefree demeanor morphed into recklessness. Forever in pursuit of the next thrill. Perpetually dissatisfied with the present. Meanwhile, I toiled tirelessly. Striving to maintain stability for Lily's sake. Though his affection for our daughter was evident, Jason's priorities lay elsewhere. Lost in his own escapades. One evening, after tucking Lily into bed, I broached the subject with Jason in our living room, a conversation long overdue. With measured tones, I voiced my concerns regarding his frivolous spending and lack of direction. It was a dialogue I dreaded, but one that necessitated confrontation. Jason, it's important that we have a conversation, I said before maintaining my voice. He looked away from the screen as if he were pretending to pay attention. What's on your mind? Kim. Our outlook on life makes me nervous, I admitted. Particularly with Lily present. I must say, we should proceed with caution. Jason racked his fingers in disapproval. The future is something you can't seem to shake. Why don't we just enjoy being here right now? Because things are pretty chaotic right now. Jason. I shot back. My voice betraying my growing irritation. We're barely scraping by. While you indulge in frivolities and dream of unattainable adventures. After another argument about his reckless spending a few weeks later, I took the difficult decision to end our marriage. It was a scary decision. But I knew it was what was best for Lily and me. All I wanted was for her to have a life free of broken promises and unpredictability. The following weeks were challenging. A reflection of the difficulties of gaining independence. Jason relocated. And I initiated the divorce proceedings. Though reluctant initially, he eventually acquiesced to joint custody and child support payments. While challenging, I felt a profound sense of relief, a burden lifted. Single-handedly raising Lily posed its difficulties. Yet it also brought immense fulfillment. She became my singular focus. And I was resolute in providing her with the utmost care. Securing employment that catered to our needs. We gradually settled into a new rhythm. With time, Jason and I managed to foster civility. His occasional visits to see Lily and timely child support payments were appreciated gestures. It wasn't the life envisioned during our marriage's inception. But it was one that functioned for us. As Lily reached her 18th milestone and secured admission to law school. A momentous occasion for us both. Pride swelled within me. To commemorate, I orchestrated a special dinner, extending an invitation to Jason, her father. For the first time in years, his genuine enthusiasm upon receiving my call reassured me. That is wonderful news, Kimberly. You can count on me, he responded. I was anxious and trying to achieve perfection the night of the dinner. I set the table with elegance and selected Lily's favorite dishes. When Jason showed up, I was taken aback. He looked so put together, with his sharp suit and little present. Seeing Lily's beaming smile as she beheld her father brought a smile to my heart. Dad, you made it. Absolutely. I would never miss it, Jason said, giving her a bear hug in return. And I brought you a little something. With obvious delight, Lily removed the present to expose a stylish smartphone. This is really amazing, Dad. I am so grateful, she shouted. We had an easy discussion when we sat down to eat. As if prospering in his pursuits, Jason regaled us with tales of his new employment and big home. I'm relieved for Lily's sake, I whispered under my breath. Jason looked across the table at me. So, Kimberly, you haven't changed a bit, he said with a touch of years past. I smiled, though it was a little uncomfortable. Jason, I am much obliged. Plus, it looks like you're thriving. Yeah, everything is fine. His tone betrayed his contentment when he responded. I've got a great job. A nice house. Life's treating me well. Lily shared the news that she was going to have a party with her pals after supper. We appreciate the meal. Parents. Wow. What a fantastic phone. I'll see you both later, she murmured, embracing us both before quickly bolting out the door. When I was alone in the house, it seemed enormous. Jason sprang to his feet to lend a hand as I started to clear the table. The familiar cadence of washing and drying dishes brought back memories of our shared history when we worked in quiet for a while. After a while, Jason finally spoke up. He admitted to me, his voice solemn, that he had been thinking a lot recently. About what? While maintaining my concentration on the task at hand, I asked. Our story. Regarding Lily. He explained. About everything. Really. Before putting down the plate he had been drying. Our past together is something I long for. You are missed. Another go would be great. A tornado of feelings was churning around inside of me. So I took a big breath. Our past is complex and filled with unpleasant events. Jason. Why at this moment? The reason being that I now know what I've lost. Because of you and Lily. I will strive to be a better man, he said with conviction. I hesitated, my mind jumbling together our shared history and the future's inherent ambiguity. Jason. That's okay. Let's savor the moment and see where it takes us. A look of sincere appreciation crept upon his face. Kimberly. I am much obliged. Do this. You will not be sorry. A soothing stillness surrounded us when we completed the dishes. Engrossed in our own thoughts, I was both terrified and excited by the thought of beginning over. We continued to tell stories and reminisce about the good old days as the night went on. Making the huge decision to rekindle our relationship with Jason was something I was prepared to do. Margaret, Jason's older sister, was the sole guest in our modest remarriage ceremony that took place at City Hall. It was a low-key affair. Nothing fancy. I wished with all my heart that things would be different this time. It was like starting a new chapter in our life when we moved into Jason's huge home. Initially, the contrast between my snug abode and the vast expanse of Jason's mansion was striking. Its spacious rooms and expansive windows presented a stark departure from my cozy confines. Jason appeared delighted to welcome me into his domain. And for a time, our cohabitation felt harmonious. I endeavored to infuse the space with familiarity through my decorative touches, striving to evoke a sense of home. Shortly thereafter, Lily paid us a visit, her joy evident upon seeing us reunited. We gathered in the grandeur of the living room, regaling each other with tales of our respective endeavors. Amidst the conversation, Jason, brimming with paternal pride, inquired about Lily's experiences in law school, eliciting an enthusiastic response from her. His affirmation of her potential buoyed the atmosphere, fostering a sense of familial warmth. Following Lily's departure, Jason and I lingered on the couch, deliberating over our future aspirations. We contemplated voyages, perhaps to the rugged allure of mountainous terrain, relishing the prospect of shared adventures. Yet, as time elapsed, I couldn't help but notice Jason's neglect in contributing to our joint finances. Tentatively broaching the subject one evening, I sought clarification on his financial reticence, endeavoring to maintain composure despite mounting concern. His response, tinged with irritation, revealed undisclosed financial woes, leaving me unsettled, despite assurances that it was a minor setback. Subsequent months saw him indulging in lavish expenditures, a stark contrast to his professed financial constraints. Though disquieted by this incongruity, I hesitated to confront the issue, clinging to hope that he would rectify matters in due time. However, a chance discovery while tidying the house shattered my illusions. Uncovering a receipt for a luxury car rental nestled within Jason's jacket pocket, I confronted the harsh reality of our financial discord. As I gathered the nerve to face Jason that night, my heart dropped. "Jason, can we talk?" As he walked into the room, I said something and showed him the damning receipt. "What's this?" My voice remained firm as I asked, even though I was deeply troubled. His eyes dipped to the receipt for an instant before returning to mine. "Kimberly, it's just a rental." "No problem," he shot back, his tone defensive. "No big deal." Frustration bubbling under the surface, I countered. "Jason, we're supposed to be saving money, not spending it on luxury cars. My work is strenuous." "Kimberly," he insisted, "I deserve to enjoy my money." But I could barely hear his reasoning. I broke down and said, "I understand that," trying my best to keep my cool. "However, we must exercise caution in this matter. We need to pay our expenses." But Jason persisted in his path of excess even after I pleaded with him to be prudent. The proof accumulated with the passing of each day: additional rental cars, flashier clothing, and new electronics. He ignored my fears and tried to reassure me that he would be in control. So my attempts to argue with him were fruitless. I wasted 2 years trying to teach responsible money management, unaware of the toll it took on our relationship. Jason flaunted his spending habits on social media while our savings plummeted. The terrible truth of our financial situation was concealed by our friends' jealous remarks. I was pushed to my breaking point and decided to face him again. I walked into the living room and proclaimed, "Jason, we need to talk." He was lazing on his tablet. "Kimberly, it can wait." He was preoccupied with something else and ignored her. "No, it can't," I said with a constant tone of voice. "I came up an additional rental ticket for a high-end vehicle. This cannot continue. Jason, you're spending like we have millions of dollars when we're barely scraping by." I was already fuming with irritation when his response was just more entitlement. My patience was wearing thin. So I retorted, "Treating yourself is one thing, but this is out of control. We're drowning here. Stop exaggerating." He shot back, his attempt at deflection driving me crazy. "We're doing okay. I am fully prepared." "No, Jason. You don't," I shot back, my words hanging thick in the air. "You're acting like a spoiled kid, not a responsible adult." When he got up from his seat, his intense stare sliced through me like a knife, and my patience shattered. "You don't have to lecture me, Kimberly." After spitting out, "I know what I'm doing," he stomped out of the room, leaving me shaking with rage. I needed to make a change since I couldn't keep going in this direction. Over the past few months, Jason's carelessness has only become worse, and I've held out hope that he'll finally see the light and accept responsibility. Additional receipts for devices and leases surfaced, adding to my mounting sense of suffocation. I was barely making ends meet, and he was frivolously spending money. His careless attitude, which I used to find charming, was now a cause for my aggravation. It was as if he hadn't grown up since our first breakup. In the aftermath, my brother called to break the tragic news of our mother's death. To make matters worse, she resided in the same city as Lily, who was a student there. We decided to take the train to say our goodbyes, Jason and I. As I struggled with loss, the stillness of the trip reflected my inner turmoil. The sight of Lily's tear-stained face when she welcomed us brought comfort in the middle of her suffering. The departure was understated, just as our mother would have preferred. Still, Jason's absence bothered me during the solemn rituals. As anxiety knotted in my gut, I looked to Lily for help, but she was as confused as I was. Jason's return following the wedding failed miserably in calming my nerves. I was too exhausted to even consider confronting him. An aura of solemnity enveloped the home as we assembled for my mother's will reading. Mr. Harris, the lawyer and a longtime friend of the family, opened the envelope and revealed its contents. Mr. Harris's intoned words. To my daughter, Kimberly, I leave the house and all its contents, made me gag and choke. The burden of duty washed over me, but I felt thankful even as I carried it. The house brimmed with memories, each corner resonating with my mother's lingering presence. Glancing at Tom, who seemed to acquiesce to the arrangement, I felt a semblance of reassurance. Yet, Jason, Silent until now. Suddenly interjected. The home must be sold. Kimberly can't manage this on her own, he said, his tone betraying any sign of empathy. Responding with astonishment, I asked, Jason, may I ask what you're referring to? We were informed of the will quite recently. I own the house. Exactly. Jason's impatience was evident as he adamantly proposed that we sell your house and divide the proceeds. No way. Dad. Lily interjected, her unwavering resolve evident. I spent my college years here with Grandma. I intend to remain a resident here. You and I are both grown-ups here. Kimberly. Jason said. We need to be practical. And his suggestion only served to fuel my growing wrath. Practical. My reaction was one of disbelief. You're talking about selling my mother's house like it's just another asset. I must say, Kimberly, it is a plus. Also, as your spouse, I get to decide what happens to it. Jason shot back, his position unmoved. Dad, I'm studying law, Lily said, standing firm in her convictions until the end. Spouses do not share in the distribution of inherited property. Nothing you say will matter. A reddening of Jason's cheeks indicated his fury. My dear, you must not address me in such a manner. I am a member of this family, and this decision is being made by them. He turned to me and threatened to divorce me unless I sold the house. The room fell into a hushed stillness when everyone's attention shifted to us, their disbelief and bewilderment evident. A wave of wrath and betrayal washed over me when I took a step back. All right, Jake, I said. We'll discuss it when we return home. Trying to hide my feelings. We got an early start the next morning and rode home on the train, which was tense because Jason's rage was building. I was about to dive headfirst into the social media abyss when a video piqued my interest. As he reveled in the deluge of condolences, Jason stood proudly in front of a lavish funeral arrangement, telling stories of his special relationship with my late mother. I felt a burst of anger and bewilderment when I saw the video, which had over 1 million views. He had skipped my mother's burial and was instead standing at another one in the cemetery, brazenly filming himself with a rich businessman's coffin as a backdrop. He took me by surprise with his deception and hypocrisy. I whispered under my breath, Jason, you're going to have a rude awakening when we get home. Smirking, he cast an eye over me. I see. So you've made the decision to sell. We're going to make a pretty penny. I'm planning to buy a new car with the money I make. In awe, I silently shook my head, with my emotions raging with anger and disappointment. The trip back seemed to go on forever. Upon reaching Jason's residence, he was surprised to see his older sister Margaret sitting at the dinner table. For this pivotal showdown, I had already planned for her appearance. The moment he laid eyes on her, Jason's mask came off. What brings you here, Margaret? He muttered, his self-assurance dwindling. With a piercing stare, Margaret riveted him. I got a call from Kimberly. Jason, we must have a conversation. Take a seat. Jason complied grudgingly, his expression showing signs of anxiety. Margaret looked over at her brother with her intense eyes when I took a long breath. ready to reveal the truth. I must listen to your perspective, Jason. She insisted with an unfaltering voice. Jason looked away, his expression conveying a great deal. Believe Margaret. This isn't as bad as it seems. Kimberly. Jason shot back defensively. Not as dire. I reacted quickly. You've been trying to force me to sell my mom's house while you carelessly spend money. Jason. That is quite serious. With a look of disappointment written all over her face. Margaret shook her head. You haven't grown up at all. Jason. You're completely reliant and acting like a child even now. Nothing you've tried has ever worked. Anger and humiliation whirled about in Jason's eyes when he raised them to look. Margaret. That is unfair. I have done my utmost. Your best. The word scoffed was used by Margaret. Even the house you call home isn't really yours. I own it. I let you stay because I felt sorry for you. But now I see that you've been wasting money and picking on Kimberly. Paleness spread over Jason's face. Margaret. I never intended for things to spiral out of control. Out of control. The chilly tone of Margaret's voice resonated. You have been taking advantage of my kindness. Being cruel to Kimberly. And guess what else? I, and no one else, have been paying Lily's child support. Not even as a father could you meet your obligations. With a woman like Kimberly. You really are lucky. She isn't worth it to you. In response to Margaret's scathing remarks, I found myself crying. As I looked over at Jason, my voice quivered with passion. Lily is an adult now. And the house is rightly hers. Jason. It is her bequest. Out of nowhere. Jason lost it. His face turning red with anger. Regarding Lily. I could care less. Either we get a divorce or I get half of the money from the house's sale. All was quiet in the room. At first, I didn't understand a word. I calmed myself by taking a long breath and then pulled out the divorce paperwork I had written up earlier. As I gave them to him, my hand quivered. The divorce papers are in this folder. My voice remained firm as I pleaded with them. My heart racing. When Jason reluctantly penned his signature, his hands quivered. Kimberly. You're making an enormous error of judgment. He whispered. No way. Jason. The mistake was ever thinking you would change. I responded, feeling an odd wave of comfort sweep over me. Finalizing his signature, Jason sprinted out of the house, pounding the door shut in his wake. There was a whirlwind of emotions going through me as I stood there, including relief and weariness. Margaret came up and put her reassuring hand on my shoulder. For all that you've done for my brother, Kimberly. I am eternally grateful. Lily is on your side. This will pass. Moving back to the place where I spent my formative years was a major decision for me. Being back at my mom's house, where I had so many happy memories, was like going on a vacation. Despite the need for repairs, the house was a home and a starting point for a fresh start. Lily is currently expecting a child. She recently finished from college, married a beautiful man, and started a family. Being a grandmother was something I was really looking forward to. A sense of calm and stability returned to my life that had been absent for years. As I was tending to the garden one day, my phone abruptly cut me off and flashed Jason's name. "Hello?" I responded, my stomach knotting up. The urgency in Jason's voice betrayed his desperation to speak with me. "What do you want, Jason?" I asked, trying not to lose my cool. "Kimberly, I am in a severe predicament. I am in dire need of your assistance. My debts are mounting up." "No way, Jason. Affirm, I will not give you any money," was my statement. "Kimberly, I am relying on you. Perhaps this time we could make things right," he pleaded. What I was hearing was just unbelievable to me. "Do you intend to tie the knot once more? Do you not understand? Kimberly, have a little." We also had a great time. In an effort to persuade, he expressed his belief that we might begin anew. "We are done, Jason. You should also move on since I have." As my temper flared, I proclaimed, "I'm not giving you money. And I'm not marrying you again." He let out a deep breath. "You would comprehend," I believed. "Your desire to assist me surprised me, Jason. I've done all I can to assist you. You need to start supporting yourself," I said with an icy tone. "Very well, Kimberly. I get it," he remarked with a hint of bitterness inside his voice. "Goodbye, Jason," I said before hanging up the phone. As I stood there, an odd combination of relief and grief washed over me. Putting an end to that period of my life, I was free from the weight of Jason's issues. I felt a burden melt away as I got back to gardening, relishing in the tranquility that had engulfed me. I stopped looking back and started looking forward, ready to concentrate on my daughter, my future, and the new grandchild on the way. It was time to seize the opportunities that lay ahead in life. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.